Hey everybody, welcome to another Kitecast show. I'm here with my co-host Tim Freestone, the CMO over at Kiteworks. You gotta make sure I say Kiteworks, not Kitecast. That's a tongue tire, or can be, right, Tim?
Yeah. How you doing, Patrick?
It's fine. We have a special guest today, Joan Ross, who has a plethora of experience in the cybersecurity space. She's been a CISO, she's a professor. She started her own company. She's worked in Fortune 500 multi-billion-dollar companies. She's worked in various associations. You name it, Joan has done it. So this is going to be a fascinating conversation. We're actually going to hone in on some of the latest work that she's been doing around cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, which I know is of interest to many in our audience. It's certainly of interest to Tim and me. But before we start with Joan, I have a quick question for Tim. So who is the band that played Mr. Roboto?
Oh, it Styx.
I was going to say, I'll have to, I won't sell you up the river.
No, that's showing my age, but I do remember that one. I also think that was at one point on my karaoke list of go-tos.
I think all of us.
Yeah.
Then the question is, what does that Japanese really mean that they have in the song?
Yeah.
We'll quiz Joan on that. So, Joan, cybersecurity AI, fascinating subject. You are in the final throes of finishing your PhD work at Baylor, actually. You went from purple, University of Washington, to the green or whatever color they have over green gold over at Baylor. What prompted you to go and embark on another academic venture?
Well, I am still tied to the purple and gold, the University of Washington Huskies, for not only my bachelor and master's degree, but I figured 3 degrees at the same university was just probably pushing it too much inbreeding, too far in the inbreeding realm, and decided to kind of stretch my wings a little bit, but go to someone who had just, was a contender in the NCAA and other sports as well. I'm thrilled with everything that I've been learning. As you know, Dr. Patrick Spencer, to be in cybersecurity is kind of a lifelong learning effort. And Tim, I'm so thrilled at everything that you do and support in the industry. Thank you.
Yeah, we do our best, or at least try.
So you're working on this cybersecurity AI degree. I think you started in 2020. You're getting ready to write your dissertation, I think. Can you tell us what the subject is? And I'm going to ask you, what is real cybersecurity AI? Because everybody and their dog, whether you're in marketing software, finance software, cybersecurity software, everyone is AI, and I guarantee that's not really the case.
I was intrigued after the movie The Imitation Game came out as to why, machine learning, which has been around since then, just really hadn't evolved into the cybersecurity realm. And certainly AI had been on the forefront for some time, decades actually. And, AI is so effective in so many areas, the medical area, in neuro-linguistic processing and natural language processing. It's very effective for deep learning. And so, machine learning and AI have excelled in all of these other areas. Why weren't we seeing it more effective in helping us with getting ahead in cybersecurity? And so that piqued my interest, and that started my research. The research design that I've been working on is working with over 60 organizations to make it statistically significant as to if they started using AI tools, was it more effective in helping them get ahead of the bad guys in detecting attacks in real time? And so for that, I had to go back and read a lot of the dissertations and research that others had published on machine learning and AI and its applications in these other areas, as well as how it's been used to date in cybersecurity.
So that's fascinating, and you're going to get it published. We're going to buy the book in a couple of years. Then we'll have a whole different podcast show with you talking about the book. But how do you decide? Everyone says they do AI, and CISOs out there are, being bombarded. I mean, there's 1,000+ cybersecurity vendors in the marketplace today, and they want to have an AI capability in terms of proactive detection of threats as they come in. They also need to have AI probably for cyber incidents after they actually happen. Mm-hmm. How do you vet vendors to determine who really has the right AI capabilities for you and who's saying they have AI, but they really don't, or it's a very, very simplistic pedestrian approach when it comes to the application of AI?
I'm glad you asked that question because I'm still collecting data sets just for your audience out there if anyone is interested. It's actually been an uphill battle in getting organizations to participate in the research because they're so burnt out hearing about AI. And there still are some fundamental misunderstandings about what artificial intelligence applications are when it comes to being effective, especially for cybersecurity. And so, the questions that any organization should have is, one, do we have a vision for how artificial intelligence will help us detect cyber attacks? Because the fact of the matter is you're just not going to be effective doing cybersecurity now, much less in the future, without the use of artificial intelligence. And then, what vendors should I choose that are going to be effective for that application of artificial intelligence and have it be an investment that's really going to have a return, as well as integrate well with all of my other significant investments in tools that I've already spent millions of dollars on, let's face it. And so that should be the very first consideration. And a lot of people are already way down the road with that, but they really haven't brought everything together. And so, your AI choice should ingest logs from every tool that you have now through API technology. And so that helps you then on a road to sunsetting your other tools where you're finding you're just not getting the information that you need from them. And that investment isn't paying off for you. And so you're going to go more towards your evolving vision for your industry on the tool selection that is working for you.
So you mentioned AI in the context of detection, and then you just talked about logs. So I imagine much of the innovation is happening in the SIM space, or are there other 4-letter acronyms that are taking AI head on?
So I consider SIM old technology, but that's just me. I've been in the industry for 30 years now. And, SIMs proved useful, but it's like antivirus, anti-malware technology. You don't know what you're not getting in terms of alerting or who's reading the logs and being able to correlate. If your SIM is correlating those logs appropriately and alerting appropriately. And the only way that you're going to distinguish that is to break through whatever might be hindering you on your team or in your executive team or, your budget strategy on at least doing proof of concepts with vendors and comparing what you're getting from your SIM versus what you're getting from new AI tool selections and seeing that alert difference.
You're seeing it as its own blossoming industry. It's not an advancement on any given technology that's been around. It's its own market, if you will, and it's just about trying it out. And I can imagine that it plays heavily in attack surface management sort of technologies. I know I have a tendency to get into acronyms, but it's where I feel safe.
Now, Joan to invent an AI cybersecurity acronym.
Yeah, exactly.
Tim, it scares people when you say SIM is old technology because they just invested so much in it. And for yourself, who, that acronym so well and what it does. So, the way that I try and ease people into the AI technology is ingesting the SIM logs into the AI technology. So then they can see, because there's still a place for the SIM then. But eventually what AI really can do that differentiates it from a SIM, quite frankly, is behavioral analysis of devices. And this is important if the AI has been incubated correctly. That's another question for your team to ask, can it detect every device? And think of this, think of IoT, think of OT, think of IT, think of just all of the different computing environments and the plethora of devices that we have. The AI, and one of the answers to date as to why AI hasn't made those inroads into cybersecurity has been a scalability issue with so many devices. So unless the vendor has solved that problem, the AI tool isn't going to be effective. And that's why you need to ask the right questions and choose effectively.
I have a question for you, Joan, as you're talking about devices. Can we talk about content? Because you get and then it sort of spills over. I suspect this is where Tim was probably headed. It spills over into content, right? How do you, all that content, sensitive data that you have is really the lifeblood of the organization. And in most instances of what the bad actors are after, how do you take like syslog data in regards to information around who's loading content, who's downloading content, who's changing content? Are they sending it outside the network? Are they sending it within the network? All that governance stuff. Is there an AI play there that plays into cybersecurity? But there's probably some AI compliance angles as well that need to be explored.
Another great question. And I would say behavioral analysis does play into this at the user level, at the device level. So when you think about all of these different components, what you want to detect is anomalous activity. A user doing something different than they typically do, a device behaving in a way that it doesn't. This is how you find rogue devices. This is how you find malware, persistent malware that's resident and hasn't been detected to date. This is where you find misconfigurations even. A script running badly before it takes down the entire network. This is where AI does have that play, Patrick.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a route that I was going down, but even if we just stick in the challenge with the scalability of devices, that scalability that you talk about and challenge is just in the infrastructure that's known and unknown in the first party, right? You even begin to think about the ecosystem outside of your organization and the scalability problems there. It just seems mind-boggling to me because data moves outside of your device ecosystem, right? Even if it's your IoT ecosystem, it's still yours. But once the data gets outside of that, well, then you've got that times 10 times 1,000 times 100,000, right?
I call it killing the kill chain, Tim. You need to detect when people first try to gain a foothold into the network, whether through an application, whether through a service account that's been mismanaged or gone stagnant, or a user account that's gone stagnant. So killing the kill chain means that you detect it in the first or second stage of the kill chain before they can exfiltrate that data. And that's where the behavioral analysis plays in. So say you have Patrick who's going to Mykonos for some lovely vacation time, but all of a sudden you're detecting that he's trying to access email from Rome. Unless unless Patrick, is vaulting about the globe, he shouldn't be accessing email from Mykonos. He should be accessing from Mykonos, not from Rome. And so there's an example of how you can tie it to a user, but it's still at the device level as well. Yeah. Yes. Yes. And now everybody, once they start down this road, they're going to want customizations because every business has some very unique components. And so you also want to select a vendor that can adapt and either work with your data sets to deliver what you need to for the AI to function in such a way, or that you can, set it up yourself if you have a team that wants to go down the AI path.
Let's shift gears. Your background, Joan, in serving as an advisor for various companies and sitting on various boards. You can talk a bit about that, right? You sit on a board over at UW. You sit on a board for, I think, the Seattle College and a couple others as well. CISOs they're interested. We've talked to a couple, right? Tim and I recently spoke with Andreas Wuchner over in Switzerland, and he sits on a number of different advisory boards. There's a lot of CISOs I've spoken to them. They're interested in that additional activity beyond their day-to-day job. How do you find those opportunities and then engage in them and vet to determine if it's the right one for you?
Well, I've been fortunate in that they've come to me, people that I know in the industry, some of the early professors of information security here who, they might have started out, as an engineer at Boeing and then went to the University of Washington and started up their security program and reached out to CISOs, for example, that she knew in order to provide some realistic education. Because one of the things that people criticize about college and university education is that it's not real world enough. And so you'll find good professors will reach out to contacts that they have in that industry and invite them in and put them on a board, for example. It's like starting a task force, right, in a police department or something. It's a think tank within a lovely university or college setting to think, how can we best prepare these students for day one of starting in the real world at a job where much is going to be expected of them. So I've been fortunate in that way, but as you know, it's the 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon thing. We all know someone in the industry now, and when you see us getting on these boards and you're interested in that, you should reach out to that person too, because odds are even where I'm at, could use more people, some really good people. We have everyone from, military to industry to grant writers, just a whole plethora of different talents comprise our board, and we all work together. One of the things that we did here in Washington State is we took the state of Washington, the University of Washington. We took a telecommunications vendor in this area, and we took a scenario, and we did an incident response exercise as to how we would all interoperate together in responding to an incident. And this is actually under a presidential executive order from 2013 that every state has to do this exercise. And so, when you bring a university cybersecurity board into it, we can help think of the scenario. We can help write up the report. We can do a lot of things that maybe, the state and the other commercial industry isn't quite set up for or has the cycles for, and make it fun and still, you're playing. But at the same time, the lessons learned from it are considerable and really help out a lot.
Interesting. Now you're part of the Holistic Information Security Practitioner Institute. That's really interesting. I was looking at your bio beforehand. You and I have known each other for a number of years. I didn't actually know that aspect of your bio. Can you comment on what that entailed and what does it mean to be a holistic information security practitioner? Some in our audience probably are interested and might want to become holistic information practitioners. You never know.
I'd be settled for holistic anything at some point in my life. It's anything, be good at anything comprehensively.
This is actually
still looking on that search.
Now that I know this, I'm going to give your names to Ty Lambo, who created the credential and got it accredited. We look at these governance frameworks, cybersecurity governance frameworks. We look at the risk management frameworks, ISO 31000, for example. We look at the information security frameworks. We look at SANS. We look at ISO 27002. We look at HIPAA and PCI and DSS and PCI DSS and all of the frameworks that, the Cloud Security Alliance, if you've seen how many controls are in that one. And imagine a holistic framework that brings all of those controls and oversight efforts together. That's what the credential is about. And how do you approach that? How do you cut through that and make sure? Because we know that if you're always throwing stuff against the wall, what could happen today? It's not just about following control frameworks, but it's adopting a governance framework about risk, about what could happen and what aren't we prepared for? What aren't we thinking about? So those are the kind of things, those are the kind of approaches that we want a holistic security practitioner to think about and bring into their organization. So you're just not, robotically following control frameworks, but you're thinking in between it, like, the frameworks don't really address how many people have command line access to databases. I don't really see that control in here, for example. But that's going to be something that you're going to want to look at. You're going to want to look at what could fall between the cracks.
Is that go ahead?
This is a good segue because I'm particularly interested in risk management and risk and the word risk. When you look at a lot of the materials Gartner puts out, they tend to speak about it in two contexts: cybersecurity and risk management. And in my mind, there's above both of those is just risk. And everybody's trying to orchestrate cybersecurity technologies and orchestrate, what's called risk management frameworks and processes and people. But they're so intertwined into just one statement, which is cyber risk. Mm-hmm. That would you say that's ultimately what you're trying to do is elevate it to the uber cyber risk, where frameworks and technologies come together to be able to see the entire potential attack surface, and how do you control and manage both technologies and frameworks together?
Tim, you've hit on one of my favorite topics, which is how do security people talk to executives, mm-hmm. especially about risk. And they talk business risk.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And that's the uber risk that I think you were getting at.
Yeah, that's right.
And under that falls everything else. And you have to speak that language to be successful. But it's a lot of times the executives say you have to speak our language without trying to understand how to speak the security risk language. So it's been a little bit fraught over the 30 years that I've been in it, except I was lucky enough when I was VP of Information Security at Washington Mutual, I was visited by about 30 feds who did risk management under the President of the United States. The USS Cole had just been bombed, and risk management at that time meant financial risk. and critical financial infrastructure. And a lot of these feds were people that I had worked with in the 90s because my start in cybersecurity came through cryptography. We had developed a client-side commercial off-the-shelf cryptography software product, and using Kerberos 5 and MD5 and DES, not even triple DES had come out yet. And so this was to encrypt the data stream at the application level to protect IP. And this was before firewalls or even VPNs had come out yet. So, this is going back quite a ways. And, it was just a niche product between Unix and Linux systems. But that was my start into the security field from technical support. And so working with these feds on this, what I learned about approaching risk at all was, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and here are my priorities based on A and B. And they taught me a lot of the language that they used. And so I still teach that to this day, because I think it cuts through exactly what you're talking about, which is, how do you address it to the executives? How do you communicate it across your team? And how do you balance this word risk, which also means something completely different on Wall Street?
How do you measure risk? When it comes, that's a very open-ended question. That's another dissertation for you. But
not for me, because I'm certified. I'm an NSA IAM and IEM, and they came out in 2003 with a quantitative measurement of risk. So I'm actually trained in that, and I'm very passionate, actually, Patrick, about measuring risk.
So can you actually get to? It's a debated subject as to how do you evaluate risk. The insurance companies are trying to figure out, how do we price our insurance based on the risk of an organization? You've been a CISO before. You have to present to the board. You need to present to the C-suite, to the CEO, and tell them exactly, this is what our risk is. We need this much insurance. Or if you're an insurance company, they're relying on folks like you to say, this is what the risk is, so they can price it accordingly, so they don't lose their shirt in the event of a huge cyber event.
So 6 years ago, with 3 other people, we approached VCs on both the East and the West Coast. We had developed technology that would actually check and see if the controls that companies stated were in place. And we went to all the insurance companies to get their backing, because it would help lower insurance premiums by this empirical way to ensure that controls were in place and working effectively. And all the VCs and even the big insurance companies said, well, people will just go ahead and get attacked. And, we'll make the decision whether to cover it or not, and then they'll buy the technology they need. And it was really discouraging, quite frankly. And so I know the insurance companies have been trying to come up with similar technology to do that since. And so the question of insurance premiums and cyber attacks really has to come down to never needing the insurance, in my book. You really just have to get ahead of the bad guys, and you have to be a technologist, and you have to have a great team with heart and soul, and you have to have great full-time backup, live monitoring, all these important oversight controls. If you can't afford these, you need to look at, going to a managed provider that can do that for you, because your customer deserve at a minimum that much. I remember when my niece was 2 years old and got the notification that her medical information had already been compromised. So it's a terrible way to start your life, knowing that, because of a lack of control, someone else's personal health information was released.
Can you use AI to determine, your risk, right? If you're using AI, does your risk get mitigated? And will the insurance companies or boards of directors begin to look through that lens to see you have this cybersecurity strategy? This is what we have in place. Oh, you need to have certain pieces in place to proactively detect as well as to address after the fact. That includes AI capabilities.
That's my work at Insight Cyber. So I took the NSA recommended algorithm for the quantitative one with permission for the percentages of measuring risk, so that the AI could also give a calculation and a confidence factor around that. You want to ask, who's your authoritative source for your security metric, your risk metric? Because a lot of vendors just pull this out of thin air. And, that is what CISOs and security teams are relying on as we present this information to executives and board of directors and shareholders. And if you don't know the authoritative source of these metrics, what confidence can you really have in them? So you need tried and tested algorithms.
I was reading, Tim probably saw this as well, and you may have. There was a school district, I'm not naming the school district, that was recently hacked with a ransomware attack. And they went ahead and said, we're not going to pay it. We have backed up, the systems are backed up. All you have is student names and maybe addresses or something along those lines. And then they, of course, went ahead and they fulfilled their promise. When they didn't pay the ransom, the bad actors released it on the dark web, and it had student health and mental records. So when you have an actual attack, can you use that AI capabilities, or how do you determine, what your risk is? In this case, they didn't understand the breadth of what the breach looked like. How do you work in those situations?
That's where you need to pull in somebody right away before you make a statement like that or a decision like this. And if it's the one that I'm thinking of, they spent 2 weeks haggling over the amount, and it was just a bizarre story in the first place, around that negotiation. So this is where, unfortunately, school districts need people like us. This is where university, boards can actually help out. Because the nice thing about us is we're kind of at the top of our careers already. We've kind of have been set up well for retirement, hopefully. And so this is where we can actually help others get ahead. And so whether that is stepping in and evaluating the risk and what actually is there, or helping before that happens, I think it's going to be very important. And I think this is something that hasn't really happened within the industry yet, that ability to form almost like they do with, the VDOC Society that does this forensic help of all these different scientists that come together to help solve cold cases, kind of something similar in cybersecurity, where you go and you help out public institutions that may not be able to secure or understand what technology would be best for protecting our most vulnerable populations, which includes students.
The kind of to take this another direction, I don't know if you saw this, but and I'm not sure if it's the first, but the CISO or CSO at Uber, Joe Sullivan, was convicted and is going to do jail time, as far as I can tell. Do you think this has any? Well, first of all, how much do you think in this case, if you know it to any more degree than I do, someone like Joe was just exercising a CYA process, which any human being wants to do in situations like that, and will it affect moving forward how CISOs view their job and the risk threshold they're willing to take, and the information they communicate or don't communicate? Because there's always this sort of, there's got to be a threshold of what I imagine gets disclosed or doesn't get disclosed in cases of breaches. But I just found it very interesting that he's essentially going to jail for this breach, not for the breach itself, but for what he didn't disclose, I guess. Any thoughts on that?
So something I always discuss in any position I go into is that there are two people who can be sued regarding a cyber breach, and that's the CEO and the CSO. And so you have to know that when you accept the position. And if your external counsel or your internal counsel, well, let's start with external counsel. Now, I have a brother who's been an attorney general for 23 years and is now a federal judge. I have a sister who's been career Homeland Security. I have a brother, my sister's brother-in-law, who's FBI cybersecurity. So I've always known black from white. And as a female in cybersecurity, I've certainly had companies try to get me to do many things favorable to them, but cross the line. And as a CISO, you have to be willing to walk away from the job. And that is very difficult for a lot of people to do, especially if they like the executive team, especially if they love that job that they're doing. It's very difficult, but you have to do that. And you have to have your own counsel around you that says, this isn't good, you need to get out of there. Second, if external counsel is telling the CEO, the chief legal officer, and the CSO that you don't have to report this breach or it's okay to pay the ransom, then the CISO needs to remove themselves from any part of communication with the outside world. You need Tim, you're going to be put in that position. Again, the CEO and CSO can be sued. So you either have to have external counsel handle it for the company or your marketing officer handle it for the company. You can't have the CEO or CSO handle it because we've seen what happens, right? But this has been known for some. This isn't new. This is actually law, and this has been known. This is nothing new where they've tried to make the CSO the person to do these things. You have to have the fortitude, the integrity, the character to say, I won't do this. And it's a very hard conversation to have. And you can read the book, Crucial Conversations. You can listen to motivational tapes. But when you have that conversation, be prepared to walk out the door or be fired. And that's actionable. But that's another conversation. Secondly, if it's internal counsel telling you that, then the chief legal officer, along with the chief marketing officer, handle any communications. The CISO does not get involved in those communications. The chief security officer's responsibility is to protect executives. And so our counsel to them is, this is against the law. If they decide to act anyway, you have to remove yourself one way or another from it. Now, I don't know Joe. I know a lot of people who do know him. This is not good for our industry. And, my heart aches for Joe because he's going to do some time for it. And, this didn't have to happen. And whatever forces were brought to bear just wasn't good overall. And that's all I'm going to say on it. I think probably there's a lot more we'll learn over time about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I can imagine, just your point there, that the microscope gets more powerful on CISO decisions moving forward across the board, which as if the job wasn't hard enough already.
And there's another risk for you, Tim. There's that fourth element of risk for you is, the legal risk as well.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So before we wrap up, I had two questions for you. One, for CISOs out there, anyone who's in the cybersecurity space, what are one or two books that are on your bedside table that you read or that you're in the process of reading that are new ones? And then two, you got to tell us what you're doing over at St. Martin's, the new role, teaching as a professor over there. What are some of the classes that you'll be tackling in the next few quarters?
I'll answer that one first because that's where I'm headed next. So I am teaching intelligence this next semester, and then the following semester, incident response, which I did my master's in, where I worked with the U.S. Coast Guard here at their Joint Harbor Operational Center. There's there were five at the time when I did my master's, and lucky enough to have one of them be here in the Seattle region, and worked with their planning commander on incident response. And the first 50 things he did in the first 2 hours of managing a huge regional incident, like an oil spill, if Mount Rainier exploded, something of that nature. And I converted that to cyber risk, the same concepts, the same planning, because they have 2 hours to get their first initial plan out. And so I adapted that then to the corporate cyber world, and I've used that ever since. And so I'm going to have the good fortune of teaching some former military, reserve military who want to enter cybersecurity. And so the Coast Guard Planning P is right down their alley, and that conversion. So I'm really, really excited about this. And of course, intelligence, everything we've talked about this hour is intelligence, right? What you come in with, what you mentor your team with, your executives, you're mentoring executives in cybersecurity, you're mentoring your board, you're mentoring your organization. You know, everyone thinks they know security, but you're really bringing a culture in, your culture when you're the chief security officer, both physical security and information security. And, you know, you're detecting both internal risk as well as external risk. And so the idea then, in terms of teaching is also about bringing that culture in. On books, I'm reading Ghost Ship right now. I don't know if you know that story, but I do recommend that you look it up. It's not specific to information security, but to kind of the approach to personal security and nefarious acts on the high sea. And what you would do in confined quarters and detecting certain things. But what I am voracious on is researching every night. Unfortunately, I'm on my phone just looking at what are the attacks, what are the vectors. And what we're seeing are polymorphous attacks. We're seeing diversion attacks. We're seeing more sophisticated attacks that are combining CVEs. So, you know, these are the things that are very difficult for humans to detect, but simpler for AI to be successful in detecting. And where humans excel is where the AI annotates it up that they're detecting this anomalous activity. I'm anthropomorphizing now. The human excels in validating. Yes, we are under attack. Let's contain this before it gets to the third kill stage. Let's contain it before it gets to this network. And how are we going to do that, team? This is how we're going to do it. So I voraciously read up and you have to always be a lifetime learner when you're in cybersecurity, because the attacks morph and evolve. That's why we're in it. It keeps us young, keeps us interested.
So what, I've lied. I have one more question for you because you piqued my curiosity. For CISOs, cybersecurity professionals who are trying to keep on top of all those attacks and the permutations that are taking place in terms of the sophistication that's being used, the employment of AIs, they use multiple CVEs, like you said. What do you read? Because there's so much stuff out there. It's impossible to read it all. What do you look to that gives you a sufficient amount of information to really stay ahead of the game?
I go to Wired.com. That's a great place to start. They have some great articles. They have some great technical follow-up. I have so many things just coming to me automatically now because, as you know, these algorithms that are in the applications, be it LinkedIn or I'm trying to think of what other good application that I use. I have even Twitter will have algorithms that will show up on a lot of the technical articles on it. But, one of the things that I do, just go to MITRE and just check the recent ones. I mean, this is so important to do. The first thing I do when I start any job, we were talking about going back and forth between, the Fortune 500 companies and smaller startup companies, and any vendor selection that you do, go to MITRE and see what type of vulnerabilities that technology has and see if they're addressing it. And if there's a technology you're considering and they're not releasing fixes for anything that's being, found as a vulnerability, you've got an issue with that technology, because that means that you're going to have to isolate and protect that technology if you choose it.
That's great. Well, I think Tim and I could probably spend about 2 or 3 hours with you, and our audience would probably stay on the line, but I think we should save that for our next podcast conversation with you. This has been fascinating, Joan. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Joan.
Best of luck in the new role teaching over at the university, and good luck finishing up the dissertation. We're all going to want to take a read once you have it published.
I have a couple more years on it left. I need some more data sets. Dr. Spencer, Tim, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this hour.
Thanks, Joan.
Talk to you later.
Yep. For listeners who want to watch other Kitecasts, check us out at Kiteworks /Kitecast. Thanks for listening.